Picture this, Council. There I was, laying in bed, knitting project in hand and winding down with a few episodes of a show I happened to enjoy. This one in particular, to be exact. When my mind began to wander. It wandered to many places. It ambled towards contestants and challenges posed. It trudged through fabrics and methods used. It strolled through ideas presented and their practical applications. It even meandered toward the idea of attempting a challenge of this sort myself. But all the clothing I happen to make is usually, and quite literally, far too costumey, so that couldn't work. Or could it? Or rather, what if the entire point was to make a costume? What if I conjoined my love of silly fashion challenge shows with my love of silly fantasy dress-up events? And what if I included my entire community in my mischief? In spite of my staunch belief that the thoughts that visit in the darkest recesses of the latest Aviva never ever to be trusted, it was at that very hour a grand idea amidst the early morn was born, and I would call it... The idea was simple enough. I provide 3 tables each with 20 appropriately fantastical themes. The third for colour, the second for class, and the first for just, well, vibes. I would then roll a d20 3 times and pick one item from each category. Then my Mage Council of Marvellous Makers would choose to do the same, or could just go along with whatever I rolled. We would then all spend whatever time we could in the month of September to make a costume, piece of a costume, or illustrated design inspired by our randomly rolled topics. In the end, I would decide on winners for each category, and we would all end up with some hopefully exciting costumes in our various artistic repertoires. What would the winner receive? The most valuable prize of all. Bragging rights, which I thought would be poor encouragement for attendance, but I was sorely and happily mistaken. For when I rolled my topics 3, so too did many of the other members of my council, and as email after email poured in, my heart swelled in elation to show off what everyone else had been up to. But before I fawn over everyone else's lovely work, I suppose I'll need to show you what I've been up to, and to do that, we'll need to start with... My topics rolled were whimsical, night sky, and peasant. I'd be lying if I told you coming up with an idea for these was difficult in any way. After all, I only have 2 criteria when it comes to unrestrained trips to my local hobbies and craft shops for fabric or yarn. The first is it navy blue or purple with some form of golden or silver metallic element reminiscent of stars? The second is it a William Morris print, but that of course should go without saying. Thus, the fabric options I have on hand will certainly do more than suffice. But what of the other 2 topics? Whimsical and peasant. As it turns out, that again was no real challenge to dream up concepts for. There's plenty of pleasantry in peasantry. Peasants are farmers and hunters and tinkers and tailors and candlestick makers, all professions that today, in the eldritch horrors that are the days of the digital age, already seem idyllic enough in nature to me. To emphasize their whimsy, one need only add a single fantastical element. For me, that element was as plain as day, or rather, as night. Herbert Sherbert is a star catcher. He spends his eves atop the trees, waiting for stars to emerge, all the while doing his best to blend in with the night sky. When his patience is rewarded and an unsuspecting star wanders across his path, he swoops his net into the celestial sea to catch it. He may only trap a few each night, but that's all that the fine folks at the castle really need. For their plenteous and prestigious parties require only the finest of cake toppers coin can buy. Do not worry for the stars, friends, for the next morn, just before the sun shows her face once more, Herbert releases them back into the sky where they belong. It's hard work, but he does it well. Good job, old chap. Design in hand, it's now time to start bringing Herbert to life, and I think the best place to begin is... To help with pattern drafting, I have this new friend I found in the roof of my house. They do not have a name just yet, so please feel free to give them one in the comments. For now, me and this nameless, unstable, dark figure in the corner of my room that I both sew and sleep in will just have to get along anyway. I fish out some royal blue canvas to start drafting a rough pattern. At first I thought I could get away with just cutting out a big circle to make the capelet, but it doesn't quite match the vision I had in mind for Herbert's cloak, so I mark and adjust and repin and chop and change until I end up with something I like the look of. This is made so much easier by our new old mannequin friend, since I can just pin new adjustments against him and see how they look on a 3D form. I make the fancy star-shaped dangly bits that I now know are called dagging thanks to a fellow Project Renway participant by using an old sketchbook page to cut out a symmetrical shape, cutting those shapes out of fabric and then tacking them onto the bottom of my second mock-up, as evenly spaced as I can manage. When I unpick my mock-up to use as my pattern, I leave the dagging on so that they will become one with their respective fabric panels. You may feel the need to point out that this is most certainly not a historically accurate way to achieve dagging, but to that I say, history schmistery, I'm all about fantasy. I very carefully trace the mock-up pieces on some gorgeous navy linen ramie and give them a solid 1 centimeter seam allowance. I make a hood in a far less precise way by drawing a big old triangle and repeatedly trying it on and adjusting until I end up with something I like. Then I can just trace it on the linen, add in some seam allowance and chop the lot of them out. If all of that sounded like a lot of work to do yourself, this hood is one of the 3 patterns that will be made available on my Patreon. So if you'd like to skip all this self-drafting or just support this silly mage, you could join my Wizard Council and get access to something barely legible to start you off. For the lining of my hood, I really want to use this bronzy gold satiny tablecloth from my State of Wizardry. There's not very much of it. The hood alone takes up most of the fabric, and on top of all that, I also want to use some of this to make these silly little star accents for the belt and hood. So I start by cutting out the hood pieces. This is the bit you're meant to see from the outside, so it does matter for it to be nice and smooth. Then I do the front panel pieces, since you'll most like to see those flap open, then the shoulders, then finally I piece the larger scrappy bits together to make the back piece, leaving me with a fair amount of scraps remaining to use for any stars I make later on. Huzzah! I compare the lining layer to the linen layer to make sure they all fit together as best they can with my less than stellar patchworking job in play. Before I can join all these bits together, I do mark out some star shapes using chalk on the linen ramie layer that I can then outline with some golden thread. If I had all the time in the world, I'd have loved to fill these all in with stitchwork and beading, but as this is a timed challenge, I just paint them with some metallic leather paint and hope it won't look too bad when it's all together. 10 painted and stitched little star shapes later, I can now join the hoods to the capelets and then pop the lining layer inside the linen layer so that their wrong sides touch, tucking away all of my yucky embroidery underlayers from prying eyes. I then spend an eternity finishing off the raw edges with some satin bias binding. Satin is slippery, this piece required much binding, and the many sharp turns and corners of the dagging made me want to take apart my sewing machine piece by piece and consume it as I went, so that I might save myself from any more harebrained ideas of the like. But in the end, it looked lovely, and you really can't argue with pretty results. I hastily cobbled together some sort of hat point stuffer made of scrap fabric and carded acrylic yarn. As you may have guessed, this is intended to stuff the point of the hat. I also add a little handmade puff star to the end that you'll be seeing plenty more of in a minute, so I will not explain them here, and some little golden bells to each end of the dagging to twinkle twankle as I move, much like the stars do, so that our dear Herbert Sherbert may blend in with them further. Hood done, what's next? To save myself some time and effort patterning this piece, I grab an old gambeson I made some time ago. It fits well around some places, and not so much around others anymore. My new cardio routine is proving quite the inconvenience when it comes to wearing my favourite costume pieces, or indeed planning to make new ones with precious materials. I then spend a fair amount of time and energy using my gambeson to draft up a pattern and make plenty of adjustments to shoulders and side seams, but I lost that footage. So here's some footage of what I ended up with on the mannequin. Now it is time to cut this gorgeous gilded quilting cotton that I possess but 1 meter of and that I've been hoarding for ages. After cutting all my fashion fabric panels through the tears in my eyes, I pieced together the remnants of the linen ramie I used for the hoods to act as my lining layers. I then iron on strips of interfacing where the lacing panels will be to buff them up a bit. Same as before, I connect all the panels of the fashion fabric and lining layers separately, this time taking more careful effort to clip the curved seams and iron everything flat so that those lovely seam lines look nice and crisp. Then I place both layers right side smooching and sew them up at the sides before flipping the whole thing inside inside out and giving it a press. Around here is when I try the whole thing on and realize it is still a bit too big, which I deal with by folding the front panels in by around 3 to 4 centimeters and sewing them down. Guess what? It's binding time! Again! You'd think that the edges of this doublet would be far less annoying to bind off. You would be right, of course, had I not decided to make the war skirt bit a series of floating separate panels, because I thought it'd look pretty when you move in it. I was right, of course, but that didn't stop me from hating the past wizard's whimsical hubris for putting my current self through what most would consider actual torture. An age later, I can finish off the doublet by planning out where my eyelets will go on the front with some needles and then roughly stabbing them in with my awl. Someday I'll finish these off by hand, but to save on time right this minute, I'll need to get away with keeping them unfinished and just lacing them up for now and hoping they hold out. Which marks the end of my doublet. I could just move on to the next item in my costume checklist, but instead I think you've all been waiting quite patiently enough. So let's have us a little intermission, shall we? As I mentioned briefly before, there were far more entries than I was expecting. I did my best to hunt them all down, but if you didn't submit by email and I couldn't find you otherwise, I am most sorry to have missed you. While I'm on a roll upsetting people, to my family members who entered, I love you and your entries dearly, but I cannot allow you to win, as that would put into question my wizardly ethics. But of those I could find and allow, I have chosen my top 3 designs in each category, as well as our grand winners. So please put your mage hands together for the Grand Project Renway judging process, hosted by the Wizard of the Keep, but in a funnier voice. Let's start off with the category Costume Piece. Our first entrant is Mina, who rolled Feywild, Wizard, and Greens. Mina crafted this lovely hat and book set, absolutely covered in handmade Mars. The textures are amazing. Great job, Mina. Our second entrant is Finn, who rolled Covid Core, Knight, and Rainbow. Finn conjured up this sword and helmet combo and incorporated the rainbow element in very cleverly with holographic vinyl. Hear, hear for Finn! Our last entrant is Hilda, who rolled Whimsical, Knight, and Neutrals. Hilda hand-knit an acorn hat, shawl, and faux chainmail capelet in order to transform into the Autumn Knight. Huzzah for Hilda! We'll announce the winners of each category at the end of this presentation, but for now we're moving on to costume design. Entrant number 1 is Zara, who chose to use my roll topics to make this very sweet lunar shepherdess. Just look at that precious pooch, ladies and germs. How unbelievably stunning! Entrant number 2 is Saku, who entered not 1, not 2, but 3 designs and requested that we use this in particular for judging. They rolled Mushroom, Jester, and Earth Tones, doing a bang-up job of representing each. Entrant number 3 is Goblin Girl, who rolled Corvid Core, Sorcerer, and Dark Tones, combining all to give us this delightfully moody design that would fit well among the crows and the coven. Moving on to the final category for this event, Full Costume. Our first entrant is Brenna, who presents to us Lady Brenna, Raven of the Grove, part of the Fellowship of the Wing. Every piece of this costume is hand-conjured using materials Brenna already had in their stash of wizard trash, which goes the same for our second entrant, Skyline Stars, who chose to use my roll topics to make this gorgeous celestial peasant costume. Our final entrant is Jamie, who rolled Whimsical, Beast Tamer, and Medieval Primaries to bring to life the Beast Tamer Renault. Jamie reused fabrics from costume projects past to create a piece that feels overall very lived in and genuine. Before we move on to revealing our winners, I'd like to make a few special mentions. Queen Lucy, who's only 7 years old, may be the youngest member of our Merry Council, but she submitted 3 whole costume designs nonetheless. Give it up for Queen Lucy. Gracie the Maker not only submitted one of my personal favorite costumes, but also got their entire family to join in on the fun. Look at this menagerie of marvelous makers. Marie submitted a design with such genuinely well-thought-out lore, steeped in personal culture, that my silly storyteller heart fell right in love. Pause the video to read this wonderfulness. Hear, hear to Marie. Now it's time to reveal our winners. I hope your popcorn has lasted this long, Council. For the category of costume piece, our winner is Finn, or @fictional on Instagram, for their crafty and creative incorporations of all themings with an overall beautiful finish. For the category of costume design, our winner is the titular Goblin Girl of Goblin Girl Studios, for a beautifully illustrated design with plenty of appeal and moodiness. For the category of full costume, our winner is Brenna of Ravenstone Grove on Instagram, for the intricacy of so many of the pieces in their costume submission and meticulous attention to detail. And that concludes Project Renway's 2025 Grand Selection. A hearty hark and huzzah to all our winners. For those who entered but did not make top 3, do not despair. Every entrant will see their work at the end of today's video. So many people deserved to win this challenge. It took a lot of time for me to go through every single submission and decide whose work was quote-unquote the best, because art is so subjective and so many of these works were subjectively stunning. Thank you all for your time, and just note that by entering this challenge, you worked hard to create something wonderful in a very short amount of time, and that in itself is pretty outstanding. I hope you had fun. Now, where was I in my making process? To make Herbert's marvellous star-shaped beard, I had many options. I could make a fabric beard out of felt and go for full stylization, I could buy a faux beard and bend it to my will, or I could just make it out of paper and call it a day. Instead, I stumbled upon this method that the beast children of the dreaded land of clocks and repeating music used to make little tales, using nothing but inexpensive and completely accessible acrylic yarn. Armed with this wonderful video, my trusty Ashford wool carder, and whatever yarn I had laying around, I set about making a woolly beard. I start by gathering any texture or shade of yarn that screams mysterious but friendly, somewhat mystical grandfather. I then cut out a piece of scrap cardboard, around the length I want my beard tufts to be, and wrap my yarn round and round it several times, as though making a tassel, making sure to alternate between lighter and darker, thicker and thinner, texture and colour for more visual depth. I then tie a piece of yarn round one end to secure it, use my carder and a crusty old cutting board to brush out the ends and make it all fluffy, and voila, silly little beard tuft. I do this many times, making many tufts and brushing them all out. In the end, none of them turn out the same lengths and they all look a little bit wonky. But that works out alright for my purposes. After all, wonky is whimsy. I grab an old face mask that's pretty rubbish at its job and chop off the straps. 1, because they're broken, and 2, because I'll need to replace them with something far less conspicuous, like this elastic thread. I then chop off a bit of the top fabric so it'll fit under my nose and look a little more beard-like. I add in the beard tufts in segments, row by row, just sewing them directly onto my base and using the steam from my iron to coerce them into behaving. This process is very unscientific. I just follow my heart and add bits where I feel like they fill things out best, and then at the very end pop in 2 pieces to make a nice bushy moustache. It didn't hold its star shape very well, so I had to sacrifice the fluffiness by gelling it into point shapes. And Bob's your artificer, Starbeard, which means it's time to talk about the pants. I don't want to talk about the pants. I stole the pattern from a pair I wear pretty often and tried to adapt it to be a little bit more medievally, but I am notoriously pretty bad at making pants. I make them too small or too large, they gape weirdly, or I can't get the closure method to work well, and don't even get me started on zippers. Even though I admire beautiful tailoring, I'm just not a tailor, and it shows in this pants making process. I mean, I ripped a big hole in the front when unpicking, which I then had to darn over, and I hated that look. Then I set out to make side-tie closures, but I made the slits down the side too long, so I had to fix that. Then I was going to add in buttons, but I just cut that bit out and sewed on ribbon instead. I sewed the second lovely deep pocket I wanted to make on the bloody wrong side, and it bulges out in the back, and it looks awful, and I just suck at making pants. So no, you won't be getting this pattern, because I don't know what I'm doing, and once this video is over, I will be repurposing these pant legs to make something way better that won't fill me with such rampant and unbridled rage. Pants done! Next! Here's where the tablecloth tatters make their re-debut. I cut out a simple rounded star shape from some scrap card and use that to trace out some interfacing stars so I can iron them onto the ratty remnants of my once bountiful fabric. I even pieced together a few patches to add in a different texture. I then divvy up my stars into piles, one for the patchwork stars, one for the little hand-drawn spirals, and the last for some fun starburst patterns. I embroider the baselines of my varying designs in gold metallic thread, sew in a few beads along the same lines in random spots, pop it right sides down on a piece of scrap linen leaving a gap, use that gap to turn it inside out, stuff it full of scraps, hand sew it shut, and then repeat until I end up with 18 stars total. Using scraps to stuff my stars means that I was able to use every part of this tablecloth for the entire project. Huzzah for zero waste! I use the same metallic paint to finish off the backs, and then I leave them all overnight to dry. In the morning, I come to and gather up some tiger's tail beading wire, an old claw clasp, and some of these very pretty cat's eye beads. I then use a sewing needle to string up the stars, beads, and closure onto the tiger's tail to bring to life the most gorgeous little star belt you ever did see. We should just be able to move on to the reveal now, unless I'm forgetting something. If you're waiting for the star net, it didn't work out, and I ran out of time to fix it. It is all my fault, really. I taped a bunch of skewers into a star shape, thinking that would be sturdy. It wasn't, so I coated it all in air-dry clay, which took forever to dry, and in the end it was still too flimsy, so I tore it apart and called it a day. I chose to rather spend more time finishing up the extra details on the costume than struggling further with something so frustrating. In the end, I think I made the best choice. Sure, Herbert is without the one thing he needs to catch stars with, but, you know, he's old. Maybe he lost it. I do hope the reveal footage cuts me off so I can hide from my own inadequacy. Oh, it's not going to? Well, that's just bad manners. I am absolutely in love with how some of these pieces came out. I think the hood is my absolute favourite, and I will certainly be adding a few more beads and border details in future to this one. I would have loved to finish the star net and to have taken the extra time to really get the pants right, but what would a challenge be without compromise? In future, I'll manage my expectations of time a little better, but I truly doubt I'll be any less ambitious in my design. After all, if you shoot for the moon and miss, you'll still end up amongst the stars. I'm happy to have brought Herbert to life. I just wish he wouldn't work so hard to collect stars for those annoying lazy bladders that are too busy faffing about to go and get their own. Oh, a delivery! Thank you all for 20,000 council members. I don't know if I ever knew for certain I would get to this number, but if I did, I certainly didn't expect for it to happen so soon. So to hear people saying they look forward to my uploads, or we forbid even mention I am their favourite channel, is a surreal concept that I have a lot of trouble wrapping my head around. I know I can't give you any of this tiny cake I've made for our celebration, but I hope in honour of our council growing so large, you will treat yourself to something of the like. Right, now for this happiness. I have some Halloween costumes to finish up. Until then, Council. Salutations, Council! First and foremost, a hearty thank you to my Wizard Council over on Patreon. There are quite a few of you now, goodness. Your support is always appreciated, and I hope that the 3 new patterns I will be providing in this video will be to your liking. Please give me feedback on these. I self-draft most of the things I make, and they tend to be a little wonky. I think they're probably the best patterns I've ever made though, thanks to ye old mannequin found in roof. But as a true amateur pattern maker, that doesn't mean much, I suppose. Feedback helps me improve, so never feel like you're complaining. If it's in my power to make something better, I will always try to get to it. Thank you all. Massive congratulations to everyone who entered Project Renway. I think this marks the 3rd time that I'm saying, but there were so many entries than I thought there would be, and they were all so beautiful, and you were all so talented. A few folks didn't quite understand the rules, or maybe didn't even get to see them, as I only posted to the YouTube posts tab, but I just chose to ignore that this time around, and judged everyone with the rubric. I've been making all of this up as I go, so this is the result of that, is that some people just didn't know the rules. I judged this round of entries based on accuracy, creativity, craftsmanship, and appeal, and I did my best to be thorough and fair with every entry. And if I edited this correctly, they should be cycling through right now while I yap away. Ooh, wow, look at those. Oh, I have no idea what's on screen right now. I'm aiming to try work on more than one project at a time and figure out some more simple projects to get a few more videos ready in advance for some of the projects that require a fair amount of time to make. But as it stands, I am a one video a month sort of YouTuber, so thank 20,000 of you for understanding that and being along for this journey. I'm off for now. See you in my Halloween video next month, probably. Thank you for your visit to the Keep, and I hope I'll see you again soon.